Today on Under the Big Tree, turning your Gloomhaven characters from this into this, quickly and easily. I love painting miniatures. It's a wonderful, relaxing, and engaging art form that makes your game look great and gives you something wonderful to enjoy as you play. But I just don't have the time to paint anymore. There aren't enough hours in the day. And so I'm left with a conundrum. Do I painstakingly paint the Gloomhaven initial characters, putting off the time till I actually play the game? Or do I leave them in a boring, unpainted, gray state? The answer is a compromise halfway in between. We are going to speed paint these characters, having them ready to go in a single day, and most of the time spent will be them drying while you do other things. You really don't need that many materials to be able to do this, although you do need to make sure that you have the right stuff. So let's take a look. We need the figures first of all, of course, and then we're going to need to prime them. So I've got this spray paint, this Citadel Skull White primer, but you can use any primer that'll work for plastic. We're going to need to paint a base coat, and we're not sure exactly what color that's going to be yet. So I just have a couple of different browns and whites until I can mix them together and figure out what the base shade is that I want for them. We're going to need to attach the figures to something, and so for that I literally just use juice tops or baby food tops, and to attach them I use some of my kids' modeling clay. It's really, really simple, it goes on easily, it comes off. I've got a little palette to be able to mix the paint on, but you can use a paper plate just as easily. Oh, and of course some brushes, ta-da. And then we have the dipping process. So we're not actually going to dip the figures, we're going to paint the material on with Q-tips. And this is what I'm trying this time, although I've used Minwax poly shades many times in the past and it's wonderful. This time around I thought I would give the Army Painter Strong Tone Quick Shade a try, since I know that it's specifically designed for this. So we're gonna have some Quick Shade, and we're gonna have some Q-tips to be able to dab it on and pull it off. And then finally, when all of that's done, we're gonna give them a satin varnish coat so that they're not as glossy and plastic looking. So to summarize, the order is we're going to prime them, then we're gonna base coat them, then we're gonna dip them, and then we're going to put varnish on them. And that's it, 4 steps. Okay, one quick step I forgot about. I always give my figures a quick rinse with some warm water and soap before I go and paint them, simply to make sure that any junk from the factory that might still be on them is washed away for better paint adherence. Okay, it's time to paint the figures. I got an old cardboard box and set it up outside, and that becomes our painting booth. Now, that white spray paint that I had wasn't working. It was really old. You can see some of the splatters I tested on the box before putting it on the figures. So the only thing I had left was black spray paint, which we'll use, but it's a bit of a bummer because that means I'm going to have to paint it with the base coat more than I would have with white. In any case, we shake it up and we're going to go across in even layers. Even layers, not very much at all. And now we're going to leave it. We'll come back in about 20 minutes, turn them around, and do the back. Okay, it's a windy day, so it was only about 10 minutes, but these guys are all dry. So I'm gonna spin them around and do the same thing. Now that initial pass didn't get all the nooks and crannies, but it got the basics in place. So I'm gonna do the same thing with the back, really light, and then I'll go back and do a final job on everything. Okay, now we're ready for the final pass. I'm gonna pick up each one, and this is why I have gloves on, and just hit all the stuff that I was missing. Okay, now that I'm waiting for the figures to dry from the primer, I'm gonna go ahead and try to come up with a base coat color that I like. Now remember, the quick shade is gonna make anything that I choose darker, so therefore I'm going to err on the lighter side. I don't want to just go with a straight white because then it'll look like a stormtrooper or something. I don't want black and white. So I want to be able to find a brown to yellowish kind of color to make it look like it's sepia tone. Okay, well I wanted to make sure that the sepia tone color that I was going for was right, and I didn't trust my eyes, so I went to the internet to see what component colors make up sepia. And as it turns out, it's 41 parts magenta, 82 parts yellow, and 56 parts black. Now I know that black and white are just used to lighten or darken to be able to create tints. So therefore the primary color is going to be yellow and red. And then I looked online a lot and saw that umber is a pretty important part of sepia. So when I found this cadmium umber red, I knew that I was on the right track. So I'm mixing that with this light yellow. After a little bit of experimentation, I discovered that my formula is 2 drops cadmium umber red, 1, 2, and then 1 drop of white to lighten it up a little bit, although I think in this case it better be 2 drops. We'll start there and see what we get. Yep, there we go. Awesome. So a technique that I've evolved over the years is using lids to juice bottles to be able to hold my figures. Now I used to try gluing them with Elmer's glue, but it turns out that it's easier just to use a little bit of modeling clay. So without further ado, let's see how this base coat is going to work over the black. Wow, pretty good. Pretty good, actually. Better than I thought. That's it, 1 down, 5 to go. I'll see you when the others are painted. Okay, I've put the initial base coat layer on all of them, and now all I'm doing is going back to do a very light touch-up second coat. It doesn't need a lot. I'm just hitting wherever it is that some of the black is poking through, especially the large flat area that's the stand, because it's tough to be able to make that smooth. Okay, the base coat's completely done. So I know that I'm going to be painting more Gloomhaven figures in the future as I'm able to unlock them and then start playing with them, and so therefore I'll use the same Gloomhaven base coat formula that I used for these so that the colors will match. So I put the paints and the formula in a Ziploc bag, and I'll put it away with the rest of my painting stuff and not think about it until the next time I need it. Now it's time for us to let these guys dry, and then it's time to put on the quick shade. Okay, it's time to take this Army Painter Strong Tone Quick Shade out for a spin. A couple of things before we start. This stuff is nasty. It's not acrylic, it's not water-based, and if it spills anywhere, it's gonna make an awful mess, and it's just not stuff you wanna play around with. I am wearing latex gloves, and also, due to my aging eyes, now is the time that I have brought in my magnifier that I use for soldering, so that I can actually see what I'm doing. I think the dip is a misnomer. I tried using it, dipping it when I first was doing this kind of thing with the Minwax Polyshade, and it just made a horrendous mess. I switched over to using brushes, and then eventually I switched over to using Q-tips. And the reason for using Q-tips is because they're incredibly disposable, and basically what you're doing is you're dabbing this stuff on and then dabbing it off. So the only downside with Q-tips is just trying to make sure that no cotton fibers get stuck on the model, but you know, if you pay close attention and pull them off, you're okay. So that's worked with Minwax Polyshades. Now let's see if it's going to work with the Army Painter stuff. All right, first victim. Here we go. Immediately starts filling in the cracks like you want it to. Let's go around to the back and do more of the same. And then once I have it all on, then I'll start taking it off with a dry side. This is always a problem. This flat area here doesn't really look that good with the wash on it, but it looks better than not with it on it. I'm gonna check over and make sure the entire model is covered, and then I'm gonna take a fresh Q-tip and use it to start dabbing off the parts of it that I don't want it to stick with. And so I'm dabbing with the Q-tip I love the lines of it. You know, the whole point is to put this stuff in and have it give us some wonderful detail and contrast without having to paint it yourself. But you also want to make sure it doesn't pool up to the point where it just looks like a mess. Okay, here is the fruit of our labor. We're going to let this guy sit for about 5 minutes so that any more of the quick shade that pools I can take off with a Q-tip. And then after that, I'm just going to let it sit for 24 hours and we'll find out whether it has a glossy or a satin type of finish. Okay, so we're done applying all of the stuff. One of the things that I really like about Q-tips is the fact that it gives you a lot of control over how much of the dip material you remove. And the way I think about it is, it's really how much contrast do you want on the figure. This guy is really scary, so therefore I thought I would experiment with leaving a lot more of the dip in the nooks and crannies and seeing if it, reminds me of like dark, thick lines of a comic book or something like that. This guy, on the other hand, I took away more and the lines are not as deep. All right, time to let them dry. Okay, it's been about 24 hours since they were coated with the shading, and we can take a look at them here. They have definitely dried very nicely and they have a good sheen on them, and it's that sheen that we now want to get rid of. The rest of it is just fine. We just want to be able to take down that gloss, and there are many different opportunities and options to do that. I am going to use Winsor & Newton, which is a general purpose matte varnish. I bought this gigantic spray can of it at Michael's for $8.50. So I'm going to take the pieces upstairs and we're going to cover them with the matte varnish using exactly the same technique that I did with the primer in the first place. And I'll see you back down here when they're done and we can take a final look at the pieces. Okay, so that's the project. After I took them out and sprayed the matte varnish on, I let them dry for about an hour, came downstairs, popped them off of the little lids, and removed whatever modeling clay was left with a little bit of a paper towel, and here we are. There's a nice amount of detail. You can see what's going on. It's easy to be able to discriminate between the different players, yet they all seem like they're part of the same group. And most importantly, it took me all of maybe 3 hours of actual elapsed time to do the work on the figures. Again, the goal here is not to win any painting contests. The goal here is to be able to have pieces that look nice on the board within a reasonable time frame. So I hope this encourages you to go out and do just a little bit of painting on your figures so that you're not just looking at gray plastic on the board. That's it for this episode of Under the Big Tree. As always, if you like what we're doing around here, please feel free to share, like, and subscribe. Till next time, this is Nick signing off. Thanks a lot.